Alright, I think we're live. Just give me a few seconds to tie up some loose ends and we'll get started. Let's get cooking. See, we have 9 viewers. Hello everybody, let's get started. Hi, John Morgan here, and welcome to this week's episode of Bob's Live, our weekly show right here on the internet. So you can find us here on Facebook or here on YouTube if you're watching. And also on our website, you can head over to bobsmarket.com/live and watch the show live. And then we also have the previous 3 episodes of Bob's Live that you can watch an archived version of. So you can head over and check that out. And well, first, before I get started today, we do have one thing, and that is a freeze warning. So it's nice and sunny, 74 degrees right now here in Mason, but we do have a freeze warning in effect, and let me click on it here. So it's for Cabell, Jackson, Lincoln, Logan, Mason, Mingo, Pleasance, Putnam, Ritchie, Tyler, Wayne, Wirt, and Wood County. And it's from 3 a.m. to 10 a.m. Thursday. So yeah, we're going to have a cold snap here over the next few days. So if you've got some plants outside, maybe under a tunnel or something like that, you want to make sure that you got them covered and protected. And, if you have starts outside, make sure to bring them inside so they don't get frozen. So, well, that is that. I know it's still kind of early in the season, so this time of year you can definitely expect freezes and frosts, but tonight it's going to be a lot colder than it has been. And, well, this week, what I wanted to talk about, if you've seen the title for this week's episode, is ferns. I was out in the greenhouse today, and unfortunately I didn't have a time to do like a full greenhouse update and show you everything that's happening right now. We're just at that crazy time of the year, and me being the IT person, it seemed like today I was chasing a ton of little bugs. Just, hey, this printer isn't working correctly, just that sort of thing. And anyhow, while I was out in the greenhouse today, we have, like, the ferns are just beautiful, and we're starting to ship them out. So our Atlanta location is open right now, and I think even here in our area, we might be getting close to sending out ferns. So I thought it would be a great time to talk about Boston fern care and some tips on caring for them. And then also, I wanted to talk a little bit about fern biology because they're not your typical plant and they don't reproduce like typical plants. So I thought it would be kind of cool to get into that. Maybe it's my biology teacher background, but yeah, I thought we would kind of do a little science lesson this evening and take a look at fern reproduction. So let's first head out to the greenhouse and see what's happening out there with the ferns.
Hi, John Morgan here with Bob's Market and Greenhouses. And behind me, you can see a bunch of Boston ferns. So I thought I would give you some quick tips for caring for your Boston fern. Boston ferns prefer bright, indirect sunlight. That makes them the perfect porch plant. They need moist, but not overly wet soil. If you have them on your porch, watering them a couple times a week until the water drains out the bottom is just right for them. When it comes to fertilizing them, I recommend using a granular, time-released fertilizer. In the wild, they use these tendrils to reproduce by a process basically like cloning. So they'll send out a shoot, and from that, a new little baby fern will start to grow. So it is genetically identical to the parent plant. And actually, all of these, when we get them in as starts, it says right on the packaging that they're clone grown. Of course, fern reproduction, it's a little bit more complex than that. The ferns that you're seeing are a phase of growth called the Sporophyte phase. So these will produce spores, and then those spores produce what are called gametophytes. And the gametophytes are what actually do the sexual reproduction for ferns. So they have two different phases of plant growth. Yeah, plant sex is pretty weird. For this and other great information, visit us online at pubsmarket.com.
Alright, so that is a very small portion of this year's fern crop. And of course, if you want to see updates of what's happening in the greenhouse, you're already watching us here on the live stream. But of course, check us out on social media. So we're on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, and also on TikTok at Bob's Market. So, as I mentioned in the video, ferns go through two separate phases. And one of those phases is what you buy in the garden center. And that's the sporophyte phase. So later on in the season, you'll notice that the backside of your fern leaves, they'll start to look like this. And those are spores. So each one of those little circular pellets basically has a bunch of spores on it. Those get released out into the air and they'll kind of float through the forest and land in a spot, and if the conditions are just right, they'll form what's called a gametophyte. So you're taking this microscopic spore and it's settling somewhere out in the forest and forming a gametophyte. And let me jump over to that. So when the gametophyte is created, and it's the weird down on this side of the diagram here, it is the kind of heart-shaped structure there. So the gametophyte phase out like in the forest chances are you would walk past one and wouldn't even notice it. Because most of the time, they're about the size of a quarter or smaller. And really all that the gametophyte does is produce the gametes. So, sperm and eggs. So yeah, ferns produce sperm and eggs. The same as all plants. We just call them something else. The sperm we call pollen. And the eggs, well, those are your seeds. Sort of, Once the pollen meets the ovum, then you get seeds. But yeah, so that's how ferns reproduce. It's just that their life cycle is split in two, where most plants, it's all contained in one single life cycle. So it is really kind of a weird process to wrap your head around. But I've always thought that ferns are really cool. And back when I was in college, and right before I started the stream, I had to go dig it out. If you live in West Virginia and you really like plants and you like to go out into the woods and look at plants, this book, Flora of West Virginia, I have the second edition. I'm not sure if there's any newer versions out. This one's about 20 years old. But anyhow, Flora of West Virginia has virtually every plant that's been cataloged in West Virginia in it. And the cool thing is it is organized sort of by complexity. So it uses the taxonomical organization system, which I'm really getting out in the weeds here. Proverbially, literally, I get. Well, I don't know. But anyhow, at the beginning of the book, like literally the whole first section of the book is all ferns. And back when I was in college, I spent way too much time out in the woods looking at ferns when I took plant taxonomy. In fact, I have a pressed fern that I have framed from back when I took plant taxonomy. So, while I was out in the greenhouse today, I picked up some fern parts. So, I was talking about the sporophytes, and right here we have a sporophyte under a microscope, or well, what will become this is part of the sporophyte. But you can see the frond here, and I had it all lined up right before I started broadcasting. Okay. There we go. So, it's that way. You can see those little dots right here next to me. And what those will become are the spores. So, it might be easier, if I show it on camera where I have it set up for green screen, it will be invisible. So let me zoom out this way. And then we'll do this. There we go. So right along the leaf edge on our Boston Ferns, that's where you'll start to see spores later on in the season. So this time of year you won't see the spores forming, but we can sort of see kind of that primordial spore structure. Fortunately, my sample has started to dry out, but it's right along the end of that leaf. And fern leaves are really just amazing to look at. Um, they're perfectly designed for surviving in a forest environment. Um, they're just coated in these little hairs on the leaves, and that is to help conserve water and hold in moisture. They are just beautiful to look at. I can sort of play with the lighting here a little bit. Let me turn it down just a hair. But you can kind of see a little bit of the fuzz on it. And if I flip it over, you can really see it there on the top side of the leaf. And if we really zoom in, I'm not sure if I can get a good enough resolution to see individual cells with this or not. I don't think so. The autofocus isn't going to cooperate on my little microscope here. Alright, so another thing that I mentioned in the video is the little tendrils that ferns produce. And that is a way that they reproduce asexually. So they basically sort of clone themselves. And I took one of those. Let me see if I can. Well, this is tricky where it's really small. So this is part of that structure. And what you're seeing there is almost like little roots coming off of the side of it. But basically what can happen is these little tendrils can kind of get buried in leaf litter on the forest floor and basically propagate another fern out of it. And if I change the light levels here, it kind of helps us see it. It's where the microscope doesn't have a very deep depth of field. It's kind of hard to get a sense of what we're looking at because we're just looking at a small cross section of this tendril. And if I scoot it along here, zoom out just a hair. Oh, there we go. So that little brown spot right there is what will become a root. And the little kind of clear tendrils that are coming off of the side of that, the little clear flaps, those are basically unformed leaf parts of the frond. So if you think of a fern frond, and I'm going to hold it up, but yeah, it's showing up black, but you can still see the outline there. If we were just to take the center part of that and not have any leaves on it, that's basically what the little tendrils are that hang down off of the bottom of your Boston fern. It still has the leaves there, they're just not formed. And that's kind of what that clear little papery bit is along the edge. But where you see those dark little nodules, that's what can become roots. And if those take root, that's when you can get another fern forming off of an existing fern. So that's the way that all the ferns that we get are produced. So they take the little tendrils coming off and they start more ferns from those. And when we get them in, they're about the size of the tip of my pinky finger in a little plug tray. And we take those and transplant them into a 4-inch pot and grow them out to where they're, or well, we transplant them into a flat, just like we sell our flowers in, grow them out to where they're a little bit bigger, and then we transplant them into a hanging basket. So that's how our ferns are started. So yeah, fern reproduction, it's really interesting because it doesn't follow the typical way that ferns reproduce with, or the typical way that plants reproduce with producing seed, because they produce spores and then go through this gametophyte phase. So it's a really interesting thing to study, especially if you're a plant person, because I think a lot of us grow ferns, but we don't really think of the underlying life cycle and how different it is from growing regular plants that we grow from seed. So, well, that is my tangent down the trail of biology and plant science for this week. And of course, give us a follow on social media. And next week will be a little less sciencey and a little more planty, I guess. So until next time, keep growing.